Welcome to Turning Hard Times into Good Times. I'm your host, Jerry Taylor, speaking to you from the Borough of Queens in New York City. It is the 12th day of July, 2023. Before I go further, I would like to suggest that the viewers of this show might want to begin watching it on Rumble, on my Rumble channel, where unlike YouTube, free speech and ideas of all human beings are welcomed and respected. I am saying that because those who censor put themselves in a position when they are wrong of having to double down instead of, if they're not willing to admit when they're wrong, put themselves in a position of having to double down, and that is unfortunate because what it ends up doing is meaning that very few people in society have a voice that's left. We've seen this increasing censorship over the last couple of years. And while there are some hopeful signs that it could be kept under control or reversed, at this stage it's by no means certain. And well, we have had a couple of our shows taken off of YouTube, and it is really, I think, unfortunate, but it is what it is. And so I'm just suggesting you might want to check out the show in the future on Rumble. As long as we still have some free speech, I'm intend to use it as best I can to share my views and the views of my guests with you going forward. I've titled today's show, Preparing for Emerging Geopolitical Change. You know, the United States has built its dominance in the world through military might rather than economic excellence. At least since World War II, that's been true. But war is expensive and destructive. Massive physical and trade deficits have arisen as a result of the United States depending on its military might rather than its economic strength. And a lot of that debt that we have piled up in order to finance our military, as well as a growing socialism here at home, is owed to others. It's owed to foreigners. It's not owed so much to ourselves as it is to others around the world. And many of those countries are now tired of buying U.S. treasuries. And one of the reasons interest rates have to keep rising is because foreigners not willing to buy our debt, especially as we have these levels of inflation. And so we're moving into a period of time, I think, with economic decline as interest rates rise and as we're having now to pay for our past excessive consumption. They're stepping into the void are the BRICS countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. There's actually 36 other nations that have applied for inclusion into the BRICS, and a whole lot of other countries that are voicing interest in doing so. And this group of 36 countries in total that are either in the BRICS or desiring to enter the BRICS, well, it represents 60% of the global GDP, 60% of the world's population. Now, in August of this year, the BRICS are set to announce a new gold-backed currency for trade among friendly countries, those countries that are really severing their relations more with the United States and NATO, and finding a workaround the US dollar system, which has not been treating a lot of those countries kindly. The United States has weaponized its dollar, and that has actually accelerated a move that has been taking place for some time among the BRICS, those leading countries, especially Russia and China. Well, this, I believe, really represents a tectonic shift in the global economy. And so I'm really pleased to tell you today that Alasdair is with me to talk about his most recent paper that he wrote last week that has to do with changing geopolitics. Well, thank you for joining me again, Alasdair. It's really great to have you, always great to have you on this show. I'd like to talk to you today, Alasdair.
Very much my pleasure.
I'd like to talk to you today, Alasdair, about your latest, I think it was July 6th missive that you wrote for goldmoney.com, Geopolitical Evolution. And I mean, this is a topic that I think has been evolving over the years, for quite a while, actually. And it seems as though somewhere down the road, maybe a month or so from now, the BRICS countries are getting together to declare at least a trade currency from there that they will use amongst themselves that might be in competition with the US dollar So these are some, I think, some very big things taking place now. But in your missive, you wanted, first of all, to address the Ukrainian situation. Maybe go into that, and I'm not sure exactly why. Maybe you could explain why that's such a big part of your story and what you wrote about last week.
Yeah, the background to it is sort of, there's several events, if you like, which we've got to take into consideration. The first is that the summer thrust by the Ukrainians to try and recover territory has effectively failed. It has been contained, if you like, by the Russians. We have had this sort of comic opera, of the Wagner leadership sort of revolting against the Russian Defense Ministry, and that being sorted out. And it seems from all the reports that Putin has come out in stronger as a result of that in terms of his public support, public perception, and so on and so forth. In Russia, this is.
Well, Alasdair, I have to stop you there
but
and
if
ask
you look
you, Alasdair, I'd like to stop you there for a minute and ask you, because that's not exactly the sort of view that we're getting from our mainstream media here in the States, anyway. Maybe in Europe, in the UK, you have more of a global picture of things, but maybe explain to us, because I don't think we're hearing that in our media over here, that it's all about the U.S. and Ukraine prevailing and we're winning and everything is just honky-dory.
Yeah. Well, there is an awful lot of propaganda from here, and we've got it in the UK as well. I mean, we can't even access Russian websites; they're all cut off, or at least the major news outlets are.
Right.
So there is it must be, everyone must understand that this is a propaganda war as well as everything else. And trying to get to the exact truth, you have actually got to go to a number of sources, a mixture of sort of intelligence sources, people who really, do understand what is going on, not what is said to be going on.
Yeah.
You've got to use your own nous, as it were, as to what is going on. And also you have to look at sources from the other side. And there are some very good journalistic sources which are independent, or at least if they're not independent, they're closer to the BRICS camp than the rest of us. So I think that's very important to understand that. Anyway, let me go back to the problem, as it were.
Sure.
The Ukrainians, their position has not really advanced. What they did was they had this summer thrust to try and recover territory in the east. It has basically failed. It's still going on, but it is basically getting nowhere. They're being contained by the Russians. You then had this comic opera of the Wagner group revolting against the defense ministry, as it were. They're very careful not to revolt against Putin. It's always, the inefficiencies and the bad planning in the defense department. This is common with mercenaries. I mean, this happens with mercenaries, as simple as that. They're not under the control of a defense ministry, and they're a bit of a wild card. And it appears that because the Western intelligence agencies knew exactly what was going on, the thought is, and I put it because I've got no firm evidence, but this is the thought, that actually a lot of this was provoked by Western intelligence agencies, a combination of the Ukrainians, CIA, and MI6. Now, because they're all operating in that area, so that is the thought. Now, whether the leader of the Wagner group managed to actually get paid by the CIA and MI6 and has run away with the money, I mean, they'll be laughing out of their backsides on this one. So anyway, let's put that to one side. That has actually worked, I think, in Putin's favor in terms of his own personal backing in Russia. So that's the first thing. Now let's look at the problems. Now the problems that they face is that the ruble is beginning to weaken again. And not only is the ruble weakening, but you have the economy is recovering. The rate of inflation is 2.5%, but bond yields at 11%.
Wow.
This is not good, and bond yields are rising. So, and if you look at the trade surplus, it was huge sort of 6 months ago. I think in the year to September, we were looking something like $130 billion equivalent. That has now shrunk right down to something like $20-30 billion. Now, this has got to be ringing alarm bells, if you like, in terms of what is actually going on and the headwinds that the Russian economy is now facing. So you can see that in Moscow, they will be concerned about this. So how do they correct it? Well, the answer is actually quite simple. They need higher commodity prices. How do you get higher commodity prices? You attack the Ukrainians. So, just keep that thought in your mind, because where we are in terms of strategy, having contained the Ukrainians, it is now time for the Russians to have a crack at the Ukrainians. And my guess is they will probably attack Kiev, and this time they will make sure that they take it. They made mistakes last time. They will have learned from their lessons. I'd be very surprised if they hadn't. Now, the other reason that timing comes in, apart from the economic pressures, the pressures on the foreign exchanges and all the rest of it, and the pressures from lower commodity prices, the other event is the BRICS meeting in August, which is on August the 22nd to 24th in Johannesburg. Now, we have a total of 5 members of BRICS, and on top of that, we've got another 31 who are either applied to join or have expressed an interest in joining.
Wow.
This is a very big deal. It represents 1/3 of global GDP and 64% of the global population. So this is a big, big deal. Now, on the agenda, quite obviously, is something, and we don't know what, about a new trade currency, the plans for a new trade currency. Now, I've looked at this question, as we've discussed it in the past. The only way in which this is really going to work is to link a new trade currency to gold. Now, in a sense, the trade balances which Saudi Arabia has in terms of surplus with China, where it is being paid in Chinese yuan, they are offered the facility to hedge this into gold through the various futures exchanges in Shanghai and also in Hong Kong. So this is something, this is the direction in which it is going. It is going in the direction of gold. So this is interesting, I think, to a lot of your viewers, because at that conference in August, what is actually said about this new currency is going to be extremely important. Now, we know that Sergei Glaziev, and we've discussed this man before on your show, Sergei Glaziev is planning the new currency for the Eurasian Economic Union, which is basically Russia, China, and the 4 or 5 states in central, the stans, as it were, in Central Asia. Now, that is going to be expanded. And I have no doubt that from the work that Sergei Glaziev has done, that he will be a major figure in planning this new currency, which will be expanded throughout the SCO and BRICS. Another point which is worth bearing in mind is that among those 31 applicants to join, either who are joining or expressing an interest, virtually the whole of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization have expressed an interest in joining BRICS and BRICS Plus, whatever you like to call it. So this looks to me, the only ones that are left out are a few of these Central Asian stands. It seems to me that this could be an announcement of merging Shanghai Cooperation Organization and BRICS into one super organization.
Wow.
So what this means is that it extends the political clout, hegemony, if you like, of Russia and China as leaders of the SCO and the leaders of BRICS into a far wider global operation, not just Asia. We're looking at global. So this meeting is going to be very, very important. Now, I think that it would be premature to say that someone like Glaziev is going to stand up at this meeting, or one of his proxies, and say, we're planning this new currency and it's going to be based on gold. We think, whoopee, gold's now $4,000. I don't think it's going to quite work like that.
Mm-hmm.
I think you will get an announcement about where they expect to go with this, but you won't necessarily get an announcement as to how this new currency is going to be constructed.
Mm-hmm.
What you might get is something like, and they're urgently considering plans for a new trade currency to replace the dollar.
Mm-hmm.
That's the sort of thing. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, this, I think, means that it is quite possible that gold will go significantly higher after this announcement when people wake up to actually what is going on.
Mm-hmm.
It may not be immediate. It may not be immediate. So I'm not saying that, the best thing to do for a trader is to rush out and buy gold on this dip.
Yeah.
And I have to say very briefly that the dip we've seen in the gold price at the moment probably has something to do with vested interests in the bullion markets trying to cover their shorts to make sure that they're not short over this event, or at least they contain their shorts as much as possible. Yeah. But anyway, that's a sort of side issue.
Right.
But there is another thing which I think is desperately important about the Ukraine situation, Jay. If we come back to that, it's now in a situation where neither Russia nor NATO can afford to lose. Now, this is desperately important because I can't see now how they can back down. I mean, what we've done is we've deliberately told the Ukrainians, under no circumstances do you compromise with the Russians. We actually, I mean, the Turks tried to host some peace negotiations some time ago.
Right.
You may remember that Kissinger, everybody denounced Kissinger for saying, well, this has got to be sorted out by agreement. Otherwise, it's war.
Right.
So you can see that. But, what we have done is we have actually told the Ukrainians, look, do not settle with the Russians. Exactly. Why? We want to beat the bloody Russians. That's really what it boils down to.
Right.
So this, I'm afraid, is a situation which looks like escalating into something which could get out of control. And that, to me, is extremely worrying.
Yes.
I have no doubt that the Russians are in a similar position. They cannot afford to lose, which basically means they cannot afford to back down.
Right.
Unless people get sensible about this, but that's so far away from where we are. It's something I would rather see before I expect it.
Right. Well, the United States has been able to build up its military dominance over the decades with its dollar hegemony. And it's really based on not economic strength as much as military strength. It seems to me that covert operations to undermine governments we don't like and so forth. And of course, then the weaponization of the dollar against Russia has really seemingly accelerated this move towards a rival currency or a different. I mean, out of necessity, these countries, especially Russia, had to turn to some other way of survival, right?
Yes. No, you're absolutely right. It's not just a battle in Eastern Europe; it's a battle in the currency markets too. Yes, I mean you're right. The Russian strategy has been. I mean, Putin's been rather like the judo master that he is. He lets America, make the first move and make the mistakes, and he's then just in the position to capitalize on it. It's like them. You sort of give the man a little push and he pushes the other way and then you can throw him. That's basically what Putin is doing. That's his strategy. And, we've been chucked out of Syria. I mean, okay, we've still got special forces there. They've got special forces. I mean, the Wagner lot are still in Syria. They're still in Kurdistan. They're also in North Africa. So it's not just us trying to, sort of do something in these countries. There is a sort of, if you like, a war going on in all these areas between Wagner and our special forces. This is, this is not just a Ukrainian situation, but I can tell you there is absolutely no way that Putin can really back down on this.
Yeah.
And not only that, I mean, and the mess. I mean, I cannot believe that your lovely President Biden thinks that Ursula von der Leyen would make a wonderful leader of NATO. This is the mood music we're getting, that she is going to be the next appointed head of NATO. This was the lady who is defense minister of Germany, screwed up, the sort of, if you like, the acquisition of, of equipment and all the rest of it, that her soldiers had to parade with broomsticks rather than rifles because they didn't have a right. I mean, hold on, what on earth is going on here?
Yeah,
this is totally nonsensical.
yeah.
This is where we are. We are so confused. We honestly, we could not organize light refreshment to a captive audience. That's where we have gone in this. Whereas Putin and Xi and so on, they know exactly what they're doing.
Yeah.
And so what hope have we got of this? This is going to be, I tell you, this is not going to be nice. It really isn't. And remember also that we're talking about an escalation of the situation before President Biden stands for re-election, assuming he's nominated by the Democratic Party for another term. So, Jay, tell me I'm getting this wrong. I can't see where my logic is misleading. Is leading me astray.
No, I'm just wondering. You add the BRICS plus. I think one of the first pluses to come in there is Saudi Arabia. And to what extent do you think they are, they're adjusting their policies with regard to the sale of oil to try to help Putin, because it's certainly the Saudis seem to have are no longer strong allies of the United States if they're with us at all, right? Aren't they an important part of that whole of the equation?
Okay, let me come up with another interesting angle on this.
Okay.
Mohammed bin Salman doesn't like the Americans, and not only, but he is a pragmatist. Okay, he doesn't like the Americans, but he will have noticed that the price of oil in 1950, measured in gold, is double what it is now. In other words, in real terms, what has happened, even though it's gone from $257 a barrel to one stage $140, and then we're now back at around about 70. In gold, it has halved. So what you're in the position of being the most important oil supplier in the world to other countries, and you've just had your oil chopped in half in terms of its value. What are you going to think of the guys who've done this with their hegemony? I mean, are you going to be friendly? No. Now, he has broken ranks, and I'm sure that this calculation is in the background of his mind. And this is why he's teamed up with Russia. And this is why, having kicked the Americans out, I mean, remember, President Biden went along to sort of try and persuade them to increase. I mean, this was the most stupid thing. I'm sorry to say this about American policy, but it was the most stupid thing you could do. Go to Saudi Arabia and try and get them to increase their output to undermine the price. I mean, their intelligence would have told them that he's already dealing with Putin, for goodness sake, and Xi, and so on. Right. And his market is not the West. And we have turned round and we've told him, we do not want fossil fuels in the future because it is creating global warming. So where is his business? It's not with America. It's not with us. It's with Asia. So he had to turn around and work with Asia. Now, having kicked the Americans and us out, what has happened is that the whole area, which was riven with terrorism and everything else, and loss of diplomatic relations, potential nuclear war, all this sort of stuff, peace has returned. They've kicked us out, and suddenly Iran loves Saudi. Right. The Houthis in the Yemen are now sort of backtracking, and that's all sort of calming down. The Syrian President Assad is due to visit Riyadh, if he hasn't already. The Qataris are now talking to whoever they weren't talking to before. And the United Arab. I mean, they've all come together and realized, look, we are Arabs. Okay, we've got, we're like Catholics and Protestants and Sunnis and Sufis and whatever. Okay, fine. But, we are actually all of the same culture. Mm-hmm. And we have got to work together. We are Asian, we are not European. And we do not want these European influences telling us what to do.
Right.
It had to happen.
Right.
And of course, that broke the dam. And I'm sure a large part of this was really planned by Putin. I mean, if you sit in his shoes, say 3-4 years ago, and you sort of think, right, how are we going to undermine the West? Okay, the strategy in Afghanistan and Syria and all the rest of it has worked because anything they've done has been a Pyrrhic victory. In other words, it's cost them more than the battle was worth.
Sure.
And eventually they will give up doing.
Sure.
But really, to control the world, what can I do? Well, the answer is I have to go and talk to the other major energy producer. Mm-hmm. Russia is the largest exporter of energy.
Right.
Energy being gas and oil. Saudi Arabia is the largest exporter of oil. Put those two together, you control the world.
Right.
And that is what basically, I think this has all been well planned. And I can tell you that going way back in 2014, I interviewed a director of one of the large Swiss refineries. And he told me in that time that they were taking in bars, LBMA bars, from Arab sources, re-refining them into Chinese 4.9 standard and sending them back to the Middle East. So in other words, there were strategic thinkers, you know, the big money at the top, mainly royal families and, you know, that sort of stuff. They knew which direction they were moving to in the long term. That was the signal quite clearly to me at that time.
Well, Alasdair, I have to ask you also, I mean, our financial well-being in the West is, I think, not what it's cracked up to be. A surging stock market. It seems as though to a lot of people, things are pretty good here in America. Interest rates are rising. I saw in the UK, you're hitting new highs on your gilt. And I just have to think that at some point in time, the rubber has to hit the road economically for the United States and for the West. I mean, certainly, I mean, here you have China, net exporter. Russia's doing quite well, I think, as a net exporter. And the United States has had to live off of the savings of other nations around the world. They're no longer willing, the net exporters are no longer willing to buy US treasuries. So rates have to rise. I don't see how we can continue to go on with a war, you know, with the military industrial complex being so dominant without upheaval here at home as well. And it doesn't make any sense, except that some people are making an awful lot of money with military activities. But I mean, certainly the BRICS and the Chinese and the Russians see that we're having our own problems economically. So might there not be, I mean, they're fighting an economic war, we're fighting a military, a hot war, if you will. Although most people are going to put the blame on Putin for the war in Ukraine. It's more complicated than that for sure. But don't you think that at some point here, something's going to happen that is going to, I mean, something has to happen short of nuclear war, for God's sake. Let's hope and pray that somehow somebody will come to their senses. But I agree with you. I don't see how they will. I mean, from Putin's point of view, they want to preserve their culture too. You mentioned the culture, the Middle Easterners, the Islams, the Muslims in the Middle East, and the Chinese and the Asians have their own cultures. They don't want to have them, destroyed by the West, essentially, right? And so don't you think that at some point economics are going to determine the outcome of who's on top and who isn't?
Well, yes. Separately to all this, we have a crisis of our own making again through suppressing interest rates for a long period of time below what you might call the natural level. No, not that anybody knows what the natural level is. We have created a collapse in the purchasing power of our currencies. I mean, when you see, consumer prices rising at 8% or whatever it might be, That's not consumer prices rising. It's the purchasing power of your currency falling. And, we've been hoping that this would sort of subside. But guess what? I mean, today we had numbers out of the United States showing that unemployment is remaining extremely robust, et cetera, and therefore the economy is not entering recession. And oh my goodness me, that means that there are going to be more rises in interest rates, and the long bond is now, or rather, the 10-year bond is now soaring. I mean, I've got a 4.08 yield at the moment. Have moved up in the last sort of week from something like 3.75. Yeah. And as you referred earlier to the gilt market, I mean, our gilt yields are now higher than they were at the crisis, the pension fund crisis, when they were forced to liquidate their positions because of falls, through the ridiculous situation where they were using derivatives to try and enhance their yields. So this situation is not good. And as you point out, the idea that America still relies on foreigners to finance her budget deficit, that's going to get more and more tricky, because you've got a combination of foreigners moving away. All we've got left basically are our close friends, and also things like our insurance industry, offshore insurance industry, run through the Cayman Islands.
Yeah.
But you've got, okay, you can lean on the Japanese to buy more debt and all the rest of it, which is fine, but they've got problems as well. And we've got a banking system which is now risk averse. Is beginning to, any banker with, who's got half a pulse realizes that the world is now one of risk when it comes to lending. So what do I do as a banker? I stop lending. I try and tell all my, unless I'm going to actually drive them out of business, I tell all of them, sorry, mate, I'm going to halve your facilities, and it's going to cost you more. And we've got this in this country. I mean, Thames Water, which is our largest water utility, was acquired by a private equity business some time ago. And you know how private equity works. Basically, you take a stable income stream and you buy that income stream. And in the case of Thames Water, it was something like 7 or 8%. And the great thing is the regulator guaranteed this 7 or 8% because he would do the calculations to ensure you had the margin. I mean, wonderful stuff. Government aided, protected margins. So you buy it and you spend 10 billion buying the thing, of which you borrow 8. So you're gearing this thing, you're leveraging this thing up, sort of 4 or 5 times. So your 4%, your 8% becomes 40%. What's not to like? Until you have to refinance it. And this is where the whole thing is going wrong.
Right.
And Thames Water, I'm afraid, is classic. And there are lots more of these, Jay, in our economy, in your economy, in Europe. I mean, this is very, very serious. So where are the bankers? I mean, the bankers are not going to lend any more money. They're going to say, thanks, but no thanks. And we want to be repaid. We want our money back. Yeah. So this is a credit crunch. And I think the important point to notice is that it's all very well for the Fed to say, well, there might be another 1 or 2 increases in the Fed funds rate, but they have got no control over interest rates at all. Right. It's now in the lap of the commercial banks who are trying to reduce their balance sheet risk.
Mm-hmm. And if they're not lending, it's easy enough to see how here now with treasuries going up, people are taking their money out of the banks and buying treasuries, and that means even less firepower for banks to make loans, even if they wanted to, I would think. So I don't know, how does all this end up then? If you've got a credit crunch, we know what they do. We know what they always do. They print money like mad, like drunken sailors, and the currency suffers, right? Isn't that where we're headed? And I mean, a wartime economy.
Yeah, but more specifically, Jay, where it goes is that banks start failing because they've got such bad debts. It's not just the Silicon Valley bank situation.
Right.
So you've got that problem, but on top of that, you have got failing businesses, you have got increased non-performing loans in the banks, and the banks themselves will go into negative equity.
Yeah.
And this means that they have got to be rescued. It is a primary function of a modern central bank to ensure the integrity of the financial system. Go and ask Bernanke why it was that he basically wrote an open check for the whole US financial system after the Lehman failure. It's exactly the situation there has not changed. Forget about bail-ins, bailouts, whatever. They have got to guarantee the whole system. But the extraordinary thing is they're doing this from a position where they've destroyed their own balance sheets. The central banks basically ramped up bond prices by reducing interest rates to zero and below. So they bought government securities at the highest possible price. And now that interest rates are rising, they've got exactly the same problem as Silicon Valley Bank, but in a huge quantity. And so we expect the Fed, we expect the ECB, we expect the Bank of Japan to rescue their financial systems when they themselves are bust.
Right.
I mean,
yeah, who's going to bail out the central banks? That's the question. Is it going to be the one of the international institutions or what?
Well, don't look for the Chinese to continue to buy U.S. treasuries.
Yeah, it's not going to be from that part of the world. But looking at in the West, it's I don't know.
Well, I mean, the only answer is, let us just assume that somehow they managed to prevent the whole system from falling over. If they manage to do that, it will be by destroying the currencies. It's back to that. We've talked about this when Cantillon worked out how to really profit from the John Law failure back in 1720. He did it not by shorting the stock. He'd already sold all his customers' stock as a banker and all the rest of it. He sold that as soon as it was bought. He just chucked it out back into the market. But what he did was he went and shorted the currency. John Law's lever. He went to the Amsterdam and London exchanges, which were the main foreign exchanges at that time, and basically sold the backside off the lever and cleaned up, because he started selling it really at the beginning of 1720, but by September there was no quote on Amsterdam or in London because it was completely worthless. And that was the thing to do, and that's what he did. So, I can see a similar outcome to this one. I mean, this is why anyone who doesn't understand that 100% exposure to a credit market, a credit system which is failing, is going to destroy their wealth, full stop.
Right.
And the best thing they can do is at least hedge some of it by buying physical gold, not paper gold, but physical gold, and possess it, or at least get someone to store it properly, like gold money, in proper, secure vaults. So that's where we are.
Yeah, goldmoney.com. And folks, every Thursday, Alasdair puts out a missive. What did you write about this week, Alasdair? Did you put one out today? We're recording this on Thursday.
Yeah. Yes, this week, I've had a sort of, if you like, an in-depth look at what actually undermines the purchasing power of currencies.
Mm-hmm.
And there are two elements of this. You've got the bank credit cycle, which of course the Austrian economists really majored on, and you have got the lack of any tie between fiat credit, which is banknotes, and bank credit to the anchor of sound money, which is only gold. So they're two separate issues, and that's really what I wrote about today.
All right.
So it should be on the website now.
All right. Well, folks, you should go there every Thursday and read Alasdair's reports. I think they're all very important. Most people probably don't understand what he's talking about. People on this show do. So you go there and understand. I mean, most people are just not programmed to understand what money is. We're programmed to not understand it, actually. And so I think Cantillon has some good advice for us, Alasdair, as you've just shared with us. The Mississippi bubble. Wow, what a story that was. And it seems as though we don't learn from the past. Do you think we might come to the point where actually the powers that be, the only way to reconstruct a sound world, a world of growth and economic prosperity, will be to go back to sound money. Do you think that that might be forced on the authorities at one point in time?
Well, it's the only thing to do, but it's not going to be easy getting there, because you've got a complete system which believes in the state, the state theory of money and credit. And,
Right.
this is why the people who can see this in the system, see the problems arising, they're thinking that a CBDC might be the answer. They're
Yeah.
panicking in completely the wrong direction. Another example from France at the time of revolution, when things weren't going too well for the king's finances, and at the time of the revolution, just before it, they introduced the assignat, which basically they confiscated the Catholic Church's land and then tried to issue a security on the back of it.
Mm-hmm.
And then they issued more and more and more and more. So, the predictable thing happened. The purchasing power of the assignat collapsed, and particularly I think that led actually to the revolution to a large extent.
Right.
Which this is something that historians are very bad at writing about. The financial reasons why something happens.
Right.
But then when the assignat collapsed, some bright spark came up with the idea of, well, how about a new currency, the mandat territoriaux? And so they introduced that. And they had a bonfire of the assignat. And guess what? It lasted 6 months. That was it. Boom. You cannot replace one fiat currency with another fiat currency and hope it will survive.
Right.
The problem is fiat. That's what it is.
Yeah, well, it's a whole different topic, of course, is the CBDC, the central bank digital currencies, which could be used for a lot of bad reasons, I think, and in addition, for control and so forth, which is very frightening. But that's another topic for perhaps another guest or another day. Alasdair, thank you so much once again for spending time with us. I don't say that I have you on for uplifting reasons, because most of the stuff you talk about, I would rather in some ways have some other guests on that give us tell us everything is coming up roses. But that's not the right thing to do either, because we do need to face reality. And as you say, the best thing to do is to probably exchange some of that fiat into real money, gold, and stay out of debt. I'm sure that's another one. I believe there's some upside also for owning companies that find gold, although you never know the political direction of things and, whether property rights will be respected in the future or not. They seem to be under some damage right now. But Alasdair, it's always good to have you. Your insights are very, very important. So thank you once again.
That's very much my pleasure, Jay. Thank you for having me on.
You bet. All right, folks. Well, that's all for this week. Actually, I don't have anything scheduled for next week, and I'm going to take a little summer breather. I'm not sure exactly when we'll have another show. I think, well, what you should do is make sure you subscribe to this channel, and then you can keep up with what's going on. But until we are on again, and I'm not quite sure when that will be, goodbye for now, and God's blessings to you.
All financial advice provided on this show is for entertainment and educational purposes only. The financial ideas and strategies discussed are only provided as a starting point for a conversation about money matters. With regard to your particular investments and financial strategies, consult your financial planner, CPA, or investment professional. All your financial decisions are yours and yours alone to make, and subsequently are solely your responsibility. The information that is supplied through the context of the radio program and any repurposing of its content by the host or network is a combination and collection of solid financial investment understanding, opinion, and comments. This network, show, and its host are not liable for financial strategies, outcomes that you employ in any manner that result in any kind of loss. Shares of corporate sponsors may be the subject of buy or sell recommendations in Jay Taylor's newsletter in accordance with Jay's objective opinion.